You are listening to Whispers of Asia, where every story is a breath from the past, a murmur carried by temple winds, a shadow cast by forgotten prayers. Here, ghost tales are not told, they are remembered, and not all voices stay silent beneath the earth. There was once a temple at the top of a mountain, so old even the trees bowed when the wind passed through. The monks who lived there prayed for rain, but what came was ash. One chant, one voice that should never have been heard, and the dead, who had once been buried in silence, began to listen. Tonight, we open a tale carved in soot and salt of a monk who forgot the difference between prayer and summons, and a chant that brought back more than clouds. The temple had no name. Its wooden beams had long forgotten the sound of pilgrims' feet. The path leading up the mountain was little more than a ghost trail, swallowed by moss and fog, as if the forest itself had begun to forget the world of men. Time here did not pass. It sat, still and watching, like the dust resting in the corners of old prayer halls. The sky above had been dry for years, not dry like the lowland farms or city reservoirs, but dry in a way that cracked stone, curled incense, and made the air feel sharp against the skin. Dry in a way that stole even the memory of water from the soil. Each morning, before the first bell, though the bell had not rung in decades, the novice monk Tenzin knelt alone in the upper courtyard. His saffron robe, once bright, now clung in faded ochre folds against his frame. He was young, no older than 23, but there was no youth in his eyes. He had been born in drought, raised in silence, and trained in ritual. All he had ever known was the stillness of the mountain and the waiting. He always prayed for rain, not loudly, not desperately, just the steady rhythm of hands pressed together, lips moving over old chants, and his gaze fixed on the sky. The same prayers his teachers had once whispered when the last of the mountain springs dried up. The same prayers the abbot no longer recited. The others had stopped believing years ago. Only Tenzin remained faithful. Somewhere in the lower halls, the older monks tended to daily routines with the movements of ghosts, sweeping ash that always returned, lighting incense that no longer carried scent. The silence among them was not sacred, it was hollow, the kind of silence that fills a place where things have died but not been buried. Tenzin's hands trembled as he ended the prayer, not from cold, but from the air, too thin, too dry, too brittle. It scratched at his lungs. He closed his eyes and whispered the last line of the rain prayer once more, softer than breath. Still, the sky did not change. Only the crows answered, perched along the crooked beams of the bell tower. Their cries were not the caws of birds, but something sharper, as if mocking him. They had nested in the temple years ago and refused to leave. The monks avoided them. Some believed they were not crows at all. Tenzin stood, brushing dust from his knees. The courtyard stones were cracking more each season, and he imagined that beneath them the bones of forgotten monks shifted in sleep. The temple had once held over 40 brothers. Now less than 10 remained. Age, hunger, and silence had thinned their numbers. No rain, not even a cloud. But today, something felt different. It wasn't the wind. It had stopped blowing days ago. Nor was it the sky. It remained the same dull, bone-colored vastness it always had been. It was a sound, a hum, faint, low, coming from the prayer hall. Tenzin turned his head sharply. He listened. It was gone. He descended the stone steps, passing brittle prayer flags that no longer danced, their colors long faded to ghost-pale strands. His sandals echoed softly in the wooden corridor as he passed rooms lined with statues of the Bodhisattva, each layered with decades of ash. Their eyes were closed, their hands outstretched. But today, he thought one had turned slightly toward him. No, he was imagining things. The main prayer hall was colder than usual. Not cold like night air, but cold like something waiting. The candles had all burned out, but a strange scent lingered, one he didn't recognize. Not incense, not mold, something sweet and burnt. He swept the floor as he did every morning. But today, when his broom passed beneath the old altar, it struck something hard. Clink. Tenzin knelt and looked closer. A tile was loose, worn and warped, the edge raised just enough to catch the broom's bristles. Carefully, he pried it up. Beneath it, wrapped in cloth, the color of old blood, lay a scroll no larger than his palm. It was tied with black thread, knotted so tightly it cut into the fabric. His heart skipped. This was not listed in the temple archive, not in any scroll inventory he had read as a boy, and he had read them all. He looked around. No one. The air behind him felt thick. He untied the thread. The cloth unraveled with a slow whisper, as if reluctant. Inside was a strip of parchment, cracked and brittle. The script was unfamiliar, older than Pali, older than Sanskrit. The ink shimmered faintly, not with color, but with shadow, like dried soot mixed with something once alive. And yet he could read it, not because he knew the words, but because the rhythm pulsed through him. It was not a chant meant for the tongue, it was meant for the breath, the marrow, the soul. He whispered the first line. The flame in the corner candle, which should have long since died, flickered once. And then something fell from the ceiling. Soft, gray, a single flake of ash. Tenzin held his breath, then another flake, then another. He stepped back as the ash drifted silently through the air, weightless, slow, like snow in a forgotten dream. And though no wind blew, the scroll curled closed by itself. The bell in the tower gave one soft creak, not a chime, not a ring, just a shift, as if someone had placed a hand on the rope and changed their mind. Tenzin looked up toward the ceiling. The ash had stopped falling, but he knew the temple had heard, and something, deep beneath the floor, had listened.
The scroll did not sleep that night. Tenzin placed it upon the altar, covered it with a white cloth, and locked the hall doors behind him. But as he lay in his narrow chamber, his breath shallow and mind restless, he could still hear it, a faint, rhythmic whisper that rose and fell with his pulse. Not sound, not words, just the echo of something breathing through the parchment. Outside, the wind refused to move. The world had stopped. Even the crows were silent. He sat up, heart quickening. A thin dust of ash coated the floor beneath the door. He hadn't seen it there before. And then he remembered. Beneath the main altar, there was another level. He had seen it once as a child, when the abbot took him down to tend the memorial lamps,
a chamber beneath the prayer hall where urns of dead monks rested, sealed in niches carved into the mountain itself. They called it the Ash Chamber. No one had entered it in years. He rose quietly, lighting a small oil lamp. The flame trembled, though the air was still. He wrapped his robe tightly and stepped into the corridor. The old timbers sighed beneath his feet. The temple was a labyrinth of shadows, long halls, narrow turns, doorways that led to rooms that no longer remembered their purpose. As he walked, the flame seemed to dim in certain corners, as though passing through invisible veils. He began to hum under his breath, the familiar cadence of the Rain Sutra, a prayer for cleansing. But his own voice felt smaller now. The walls were listening. He reached the altar. The scroll still lay beneath the cloth, but the white had turned gray. He knelt and gently pushed the altar aside, stone scraping against stone. Beneath it, the old trapdoor waited, carved with lotus patterns worn smooth by centuries of prayer. His lamp flickered as he pried it open. A breath of air rose from below, cold, damp, and heavy with dust that tasted faintly of metal and incense, the smell of age, and something older than age. Steps descended into darkness. He hesitated. It was forbidden for novices to enter the ash chamber. The abbot himself had sealed it after the plague of the starving years, when half the monks had died, and the others were said to have buried them upright, chanting as they closed the earth over their heads. But the whisper from the scroll had not stopped. It called to him, softly, patiently, as though waiting for him to answer. He began to descend. The sound of his footsteps changed as he went, from wood to stone to hollow earth. The deeper he went, the thicker the air became. It was not the cold of caves, but the chill of memory, of breath that had once filled this space long ago and still refused to fade. When he reached the bottom, the flame dimmed again. The chamber stretched wide, its ceiling low, its walls carved with alcoves, hundreds of them, each holding a clay urn sealed with wax and marked with names in forgotten tongues. He raised his lamp. The walls shimmered faintly, not from reflection, but from the inscriptions themselves. Words carved in the stone glowed faintly beneath the soot, as if written in light that had been buried alive. He stepped closer. Each inscription bore a monk's name, followed by a line of prayer, but one alcove stood empty, its inscription unfinished. The name had been scraped off, and beneath it, carved into the stone with the precision of ritual, was a single symbol, the same as on the hidden scroll. He felt his breath catch. The lines curved like flowing water, no, like smoke, no, like something alive. And though it was carved in stone, it seemed to shift when he blinked. He reached out a trembling hand. The stone was warm. Then a sound, a sigh. It came from behind him. He turned sharply, the flame quivering in his hand. Nothing, just rows of urns staring back at him, silent witnesses to his trespass. But the whisper returned, stronger now, not from the air but from within his chest, as though something inside him were remembering the chant. He knelt before the empty alcove. His lips moved without will. The words rose like mist, soft, broken, ancient. And as he spoke them, the ash above his head began to fall. A gentle shower at first, then thicker. It drifted across the chamber like smoke, settling on the urns, the floor, his shoulders. Tenzin closed his eyes and kept chanting. The air grew heavy. Something cracked. He opened his eyes. A thin fissure ran through the stone floor, cutting straight across the chamber. From within it rose a low hum, the same rhythm as his own breath, as though the earth was answering him. He stood, stepping back. The urns began to tremble. One fell, then another. Lids rolled open, and gray dust spilled out, swirling in the air like a storm of memory. Tenzin backed against the wall, clutching the lamp. The flame stretched tall, then bent toward the fissure, drawn by unseen wind. The whisper grew louder, many voices now, not angry, not sorrowful, but pleading. Layered upon one another like monks reciting from beyond the soil. And then he saw them. Figures forming in the drifting ash, faint, human-shaped, their robes dissolving into smoke, their heads bowed, hands clasped, but their mouths did not move. The chanting came from within them. He stumbled backward, striking the stair. The lamp fell and shattered. Darkness consumed the chamber. Only the chanting remained. He crawled toward the stairs, gasping, his lungs filled with the dry taste of ash, each breath scratched like sand. Behind him, something moved, slow, deliberate, the sound of bare feet brushing stone. He reached the first step, pulling himself upward. The voices followed him, echoing his own prayer, the same words that he had whispered in the courtyard that morning, now turned hollow and cold, as if mocking his devotion. When he burst through the trap door and slammed it shut, the trance cut off. He knelt on the floor, shaking, staring at the cracks in the tile. The silence above felt deafening. The air shimmered faintly with drifting ash, and the scroll on the altar was gone. Only the gray cloth remained, but beneath it, pressed into the dust, lay the imprint of a single hand, blackened, burnt, and still warm. Morning never truly arrived at the mountain temple. There was only a gradual graying of the sky, the soft lifting of darkness, as if the sun hesitated before climbing too high. But on this particular morning, the light seemed reluctant altogether, choked behind something dense, something unnatural. Tenzin awoke with ash on his tongue. He sat up, coughing dryly, fingers brushing flakes from his robe. They were everywhere now, in the corners of the room, in the folds of his bedding, in the lines of his palm. It hadn't rained, yet the world outside his window was dusted white, as if snow had fallen in a world that had forgotten cold. He stood slowly. His breath steamed slightly, not from temperature, but from something unnatural in the air, like standing too close to a fire that wasn't burning. The bell had not rung. The others had not stirred. And the sky above the temple roofs looked wrong. It was the color of old bone, flat, pale, and moving, not with clouds, but with a slow, constant fall of gray. He stepped outside into the courtyard. Ash fell like soft feathers, swirling gently, weightless. No sound, no wind, but in every direction it came down. From where? There were no clouds, just a ceiling of lightless sky. He raised his hands, catching a few flakes. They melted on his skin, not into water, but into soot. As he stood, he realized something else. He had not heard the birds, not the crows, not even the small cliff dwellers that nested beneath the eaves. The temple was silent, more silent than it had ever been. And then, faintly, beneath the ash fall, he heard it again. The chant, low, measured, ancient. He turned. It came not from below this time, but from the eastern corridor, the one leading to the old scripture room, a place sealed since before his birth. He moved cautiously through the ash-covered halls, sandals brushing soft trails in the gray carpet. The doors to the scripture room were open. No one had opened them in years. Inside, the air was thicker, as if centuries of silence had been stirred overnight. Scrolls lay untouched on their shelves, dust gathered like skin on the bones of forgotten wisdom. At the center of the room sat one monk. Tenzin stopped short. His throat tightened. It was Brother Nyan, one of the oldest monks in the temple. Blind, barely able to walk, often silent for days. But now, he chanted, softly, perfectly, in the same tongue from the scroll. He approached, heart pounding. "Brother," he whispered. The old monk did not move. His back was straight, hands folded in prayer, eyes wide open, milky white, unseeing, staring directly ahead. The chant rose in volume. Tenzin took another step, and then he saw the scroll. It lay unrolled before Brother Nyan, the same cloth now stretched across the floor, the black-threaded script glowing faintly, as if inked in fire and soot. He knelt down. The parchment pulsed. The words rearranged themselves. His breath caught. This was not memory. This was not hallucination. This was invitation. He should have turned away, should have burned it, should have run. Instead, his lips parted, and he spoke. One line, then another. The chant came effortlessly now, as if it had always been hidden in his ribs, waiting to be exhaled. The room darkened. The ash fell heavier outside. And as he finished the final verse, something ancient stirred across the stones of the temple. It was not thunder, not wind, but a movement like fabric being drawn across the earth. He stumbled backward. Brother Nyan collapsed silently, the scroll curling in on itself. But the chant did not stop, because now it came from outside. Tenzin rushed to the courtyard. There, in the center of the temple grounds, stood the other monks. Each of them, barefoot, unmoving, heads bowed, hands folded, and from their mouths, not open, not moving, the chant echoed. The sky thickened, ash began to pour, and then the bell rang. Once, a single, hollow, metallic note, not from the wind, not from a monk's hand, but from something else, old, something that had once rung that bell before temples were made of stone. The sound carried across the mountain, low, solemn, like a name remembered in grief. The ash responded, dancing in spirals, rising and falling, coating the monks' shoulders, their heads, their tongues. Tenzin fell to his knees. His fingers gripped the soil. It was warm. He reached down. The dirt beneath the courtyard was not dirt at all. It was bone dust, pressed together by centuries, ground fine by karma, and now stirred awake. He looked up. The monks had begun to walk, slowly, silently, toward the bell tower. Tenzin followed them. The chant now lived in the walls, and in the soil, and in him. They climbed the narrow steps together, one by one, up into the tower where the great bronze bell hung like a lung of the gods. At the top, the rope moved. There was no wind, no hand, just motion. Tenzin saw the abbot standing in the shadows, hands clasped, head lowered, lips unmoving. But the chant came from him too, from all of them, from the wood, the stone, the very breath of the temple. The rope rose, fell. The bell swung once more. Gong. Ash burst from the tower like breath from the dead. It drifted down the mountain, and far below, in the village long abandoned, the chimes hanging from empty homes began to ring, one by one, as if answering.
There is a weight in sound, a heaviness that settles in the ribs and echoes long after silence returns. That night, the bell's toll had not simply rung through the air. It had pressed into the temple's bones, and the bones were beginning to move. The ash did not stop falling. It thickened. By morning, the rooftops were white, the courtyard veiled in gray. The sacred lotus pond was choked, every surface coated, every breath tasting of smoke that had no fire. Tenzin stood alone at the base of the bell tower, eyes raised toward the top. The monks had dispersed at dawn. No words, no memory of climbing, no acknowledgement of the chant they had all spoken without voice. When he had asked Brother Nian, the old man simply blinked, confused. "What chant?" he whispered hoarsely. "I have not spoken in days." Tenzin's own memory felt like smoke, but he knew what he had heard. The bell had moved, the chant had lived, and something had awakened. Now the tower loomed above him,
a silent pillar rising into the sky of falling ash. He placed his hand on the wood. It was cold, and yet throbbed faintly beneath his palm, as though remembering. He ascended. The stairs creaked underfoot. With each step, the air thinned, not from altitude, but from presence, as if something unseen filled the spaces between dust motes, pressing against his skin, his breath. When he reached the top, the great bell hung still, massive, bronze turned green by centuries, its rim dusted with white, its body etched with prayers no one had read in a generation. He stepped closer. The rope, coiled and unmoving, swayed gently, though the windows were shut. He did not touch it. Instead, he looked to the wooden platform where the bell ringer once stood. Old footprints, some fresher than they should be. He looked around. No one. And yet, a whisper. Not from the room, from the bell itself. It was not speech, not wind, but a vibration of meaning, a hum that lived just below hearing. He knelt, closed his eyes, listened, and the bell sang, not with sound, but with memory. Tenzin saw it, clear as dream. The mountain, 1,000 years ago. The temple, newly built. The monks, alive with devotion, robes bright, faces serene. They stood in rows, chanting beneath a clear sky. The bell tolled on festival days, its sound carrying for miles. Villagers came with offerings, with prayers for crops, for children, for rain. But then came the years of silence, the famine, the fire, and then the forbidden chant. A monk had once whispered it, a monk whose name had been scraped from the stones, a monk who believed that if prayer could not bring rain, perhaps something older could. He chanted, and the rain came, but it was ash. Tenzin opened his eyes. The bell loomed above him, unchanged, but something cold now dripped down its side. He touched it. Ash, wetting like blood. He stumbled back, and the rope moved. It coiled upward as if pulled, then dropped. Gong! The sound rippled through his chest like a drumbeat from beneath the earth. Tenzin fell to his knees. The air in the tower thickened, swirled, dimmed. The ash danced in patterns, circles, spirals, symbols he had seen only once on the scroll. He fled, down the stairs, through the corridor, out into the open. But the sound followed. Even as silence returned, it echoed in his bones. He reached the courtyard. The other monks were there, standing, all of them, facing the bell tower, as if waiting. He turned. The bell swayed once more, without wind, without touch. He whispered, "Do you hear it?" None answered. Their eyes were open, but not here. Tenzin stepped closer to Brother Liam, a monk barely older than himself. "Liam," he said gently. The monk turned to face him, slowly. His mouth opened. No sound, just a slow exhale of ash. And then, a smile. Thin, crooked, unnatural. Tenzin backed away. The sky above dimmed further. He looked up. There were no clouds, only movement, shadows, shifting within the ash like hands brushing silk from the heavens. He turned to the abbot. The old man stood at the steps of the prayer hall, eyes closed, fingers moving slowly in a mudra. "Abbot," he whispered, "what is happening?" The abbot did not respond, but he spoke, softly, calmly, and Tenzin froze. It was the chant, the same one. In the same voice the scroll had whispered, the same rhythm that called down ash. Tenzin dropped to his knees. His hands trembled. The bell rang again, and far down the mountain, beyond the ash-choked trees, the wind carried that sound to a place that had not heard prayer in decades. The village, abandoned for years, until now. Because as the ash reached the roofs of the empty homes, one window slowly creaked open, and inside, the ancestral altar lit itself, not with flame, but with chanting. The library of the mountain temple had once smelled of sandalwood and smoke. Even long after the fires had gone out, the old wood still carried the scent of devotion, of fingers tracing ancient texts, of lips brushing worn sutras with reverent breath. But now it smelled only of ash. Tenzin stood barefoot at the threshold, hesitant to enter. The doors had been left open, not wide, just enough for wind to slip through if there had been any. But there was no breeze now, only the falling silence of white dust settling into every corner of the sacred space. He stepped inside. The air exhaled, as if the air itself had been holding its breath for centuries. Scrolls lined the walls, hundreds of them, wrapped tightly in silk, arranged by lineage, by decade, by discipline. But they no longer gleamed with lacquered wood or polished care. Now they sagged beneath the weight of ash. Some had brushed open at the seams. Some wept soot from within. Tenzin approached one shelf and reached for a familiar scroll, the Lotus Sutra, the same version he had recited every morning for 10 years. The silk cracked beneath his fingers. As he unrolled it, the ink, once bold and black, began to fade. Letter by letter, line by line, until only smudges remained. Then, slowly, new markings bled up through the parchment, not in Pali, not in Sanskrit, not in any language taught at the monastery. They were symbols, curved, sharp, breathing. He dropped the scroll. Its ashes burst into the air like breath from a dying fire. Tenzin backed away. His heart pounded, his hands shook. On the opposite wall, he saw more scrolls unraveling themselves, ribbons of paper rolling open silently, exposing lines that crawled with moving script. It writhed like vines seeking sunlight, or veins pulsing beneath skin. He turned toward the center of the library. The prayer table had been overturned. The cushions were missing, and someone had drawn a circle in the dust, a perfect one, etched by fingertip or by nail, he couldn't tell. At its center, a single stone rested, small, black, wet. He bent down. It wasn't stone. It was a tongue, shriveled, burned at the root. He stumbled back. His shoulder struck a shelf. Several scrolls tumbled down, erupting into soft gray plumes. One hit the ground and burst apart, the air instantly filled with the now familiar whisper, the chant. It was everywhere now, in the walls, in the wood, in the very grain of the floor. It did not need a mouth to speak. Tenzin pressed his hands to his ears, but the words pulsed from inside him, rising from memory, from marrow, from the quiet spaces between thoughts. He ran. Back through the hallway, past the statues of the Bodhisattva, whose eyes now bled black tears that left no trail. Into the central corridor, where the other monks were gathered. He stopped short. They stood in rows, chanting, their lips unmoving, their hands folded, their eyes closed or burned away, and each one held a sutra scroll open and upside down, as if reading not from the teachings of light, but from beneath them. Tenzin's voice cracked. "Abbot!" No reply. He approached Brother Liam again. His eyes were sunken, his skin grayer than before. Tenzin reached out, grabbed the scroll from his hands, tore it away. The chanting faltered. Liam's head twitched toward him, not turned, twitched, like a puppet forced to recall what the strings once did. His mouth opened. Inside, there was no tongue. Only ash. It poured out in slow streams, drifting into the air between them, curling into letters, the same symbols that had replaced the sutras. Tenzin screamed and dropped the scroll. It shattered like clay, not parchment, not paper. Ceramic? No. Bone. It had been bone all along. He staggered back. All around him, the monk's eyes opened, white, empty, but focused on him. The chanting returned, louder now, inescapable. He ran, up the corridor, past the sleeping quarters, to the abbot's chamber. He slammed open the door. The abbot sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by candles that dripped not wax, but blackened oil. His eyes were closed, but he spoke. Tenzin. The novice fell to his knees. "Please, what is this? What's happening?" The abbot opened his eyes. They were filled with ash. The sutras have been rewritten, not by us, but by what came before us. Before? The abbot tilted his head, almost gently. There are chants older than truth, words that do not pray, they summon. Tenzin shook his head. "I only wanted rain." The abbot smiled. "And you received it, just not for the living." The floor beneath them trembled, not violently, not threatening, but waking. From deep below, a sound rose, not of stone cracking or wood groaning, but of parchment turning, page after page, as if the earth itself had become a scroll and someone was reading every forgotten name aloud. There is a silence that lives deeper than sound, a silence beneath temples, beneath prayer, beneath even death. And sometimes it rises. It began with a crack, thin, sharp, like ice breaking on a lake no longer frozen. but it came from the prayer hall floor. Tenzin was kneeling in meditation when it happened. His breath was still shallow from the conversation with the abbot the night before. The scrolls, the ash, the chanting, all now pulsing through his mind like veins in flame. He closed his eyes, trying to return to stillness. Then, the crack. A second followed, long, slow. He opened his eyes. The monks around him did not move, but beneath their knees the floor trembled, not as from quake or storm, but like something pushing up from underneath. Tenzin pressed his palm to the temple boards, warm and rising. He stood slowly and stepped backward. The monks continued to chant, their eyes closed, their mouths unmoving, as if entranced or waiting. Another crack, louder this time, splintered across the floor in a jagged line, from the front altar all the way back to the stone threshold. And then, the floor swelled, a slow bulge, as though the wood was breathing. Tenzin backed away, his throat dry, his legs locked in fear. The abbot entered. He did not seem surprised. He walked calmly to the edge of the swelling floor, lowered himself to one knee, and placed a hand over the rising center. "I told them not to bury them upright," he said softly. Tenzin stared. "What?" The abbot closed his eyes. It was during the famine, when food ran out and faith grew thin. Some monks turned to forbidden chants, seeking spirits to bring rain or vengeance. Their chants became curses, their chants doors. The elders decided they must not rise again. The floor cracked again. "But we were wrong," the abbot whispered. "Nothing buried upright stays buried long." Tenzin's heart pounded. The chanting grew louder, no longer just from the mouths of the monks. Now it came from beneath, from under the floorboards. He stepped forward. "What's beneath the prayer hall?" The abbot opened his eyes. 27 monks. Tenzin froze. "Buried here?" "Yes, not in urns, not in peace, but standing, facing upward, as if waiting to be remembered." A long splinter cracked across the center of the hall. The wood bent, groaned, and then, snap! A hand, thin, pale, reached up through the floor. Not clawing, not violent, just present. Then another, and another. They pushed upward slowly, not through strength, but through inevitability. The monks around the hall did not react. They continued to chant, their bodies still, but voices not their own. Tenzin stepped back toward the doorway. The floor buckled. From beneath the boards, figures began to rise, not crawling, not gasping, just standing, as if they had never fallen at all. Their robes were half decayed, their faces blurred by time and soot, but their posture was perfect, spines straight, eyes closed, hands in mudras of silent prayer. They formed a circle at the center of the prayer hall, 27 in total. The buried monks. And together, in unison, They chanted, louder than before, not in volume, but in weight. Their words fell like stones in water. Tenzin dropped to his knees. His ears rang, his mind blurred. He felt his own breath matching the chant, his ribs tightening, his spine straightening without his command. He was being pulled into it, into the rhythm, into the fold. The abbot placed a hand on his shoulder. "They are not angry," he whispered. "They do not seek revenge. They seek completion." "Of what?" Tenzin rasped. The chant was never finished. The ground trembled again. Ash poured through the cracks, rising like smoke around the feet of the upright monks. One stepped forward. His eyes opened. No iris, no white, only a void swirling with symbols. He raised his hand and pointed at Tenzin. The abbot's grip tightened on his shoulder. "You were the first in generations to say the opening line." Tenzin shook his head. "I didn't know." The abbot nodded, exactly why it worked. The monk stepped closer. The chant crescendoed, and in the ash-filled air, the symbols appeared once more, swirling around Tenzin's head, drawing tighter, slower. He felt it, not fear, not pain, but obligation, like waking up and remembering you were meant to finish something long forgotten. The monk extended his hand. Tenzin hesitated, then reached out. Their palms met, and for one breathless moment, the entire temple fell silent. Before the ash, the garden had been sacred. It sat on the eastern side of the temple, just past the stone lanterns and the weathered fox statue, where the sun would rise gently each morning and warm the soil like a whispered blessing. There, among the quiet roots and lotus blossoms, monks once brew herbs for medicine, offered flowers to the shrines, and tended to the delicate balance between karma and earth. It was said that the garden reflected the soul of the temple. So long as it bloomed, harmony remained. But now, it was silent. Tenzin stood at the threshold of the garden path. Ash blanketed everything. The once green leaves had curled in on themselves like clenched hands. The lotus pond had receded into a shallow pit of black silt. Even the bamboo shoots had splintered, cracking from within, hollow like bones left too long in the sun. He stepped forward. Each footfall left a pale mark behind, a trail through the gray. Nothing moved, not the insects, not the wind, only the ash drifting downward like the breath of old prayers finally exhaled. He knelt beside the lotus bed. The flowers were gone. In their place were stalks bent with rot, their petals fallen, their seed pods open like mouths in mid-chant. He touched the soil. Dry, powdered, warm. Not from sun, from something else. He dug a little, pressing deeper with his fingers, and then he felt it. Not rock, not root, but soft, slick. He pulled it up, A jar, small, ceramic, sealed with wax. A burial urn. His breath caught. This was the garden, not the ash chamber, not the columbarium. This was not supposed to be here. He wiped it clean. There was a name etched into its base, but it had been scratched out. Only one character remained, a symbol, the same one from the scroll. He placed the jar beside him and rose. Suddenly, he noticed something. The offerings were still there. Tiny rice bowls, burnt incense sticks, water vessels. But all had tipped over, not from wind, but from movement, from beneath. He turned slowly toward the center of the garden. The sacred Bodhi tree still stood, its root tangled and wide, its trunk twisted by time and prayer, but its bark was split. A jagged line down the middle, like a wound that had opened from the inside. From within it, ash oozed, not poured, not spilled, oozed, as though the tree were weeping all the sins it had witnessed. Tenzin stepped back, then stopped. He wasn't alone. On the far side of the garden, standing in the shadow of the shrine gate, was a monk, not one of the living. He wore no sandals, his robe was faded to threads, and his eyes were closed, but his head tilted toward Tenzin, as if listening. Tenzin whispered, "Who are you?" The figure did not move, but the wind returned, gently just for a breath, and carried the faint sound of chanting. The same chant, always the same. The figure stepped forward, once, then again. Tenzin didn't flee, he couldn't. His feet rooted to the earth like the flowers that no longer bloomed. The figure walked slowly to the Bodhi tree and stopped. He placed one hand on the split bark and whispered something Tenzin could not hear. The ash slowed. Then the monk turned and walked behind the tree and vanished. Tenzin rushed forward. No one. Only the tree, only the ash, only silence. He looked down. Where the monk had stood, small gray blossoms had bloomed from the ash, but they were inverted, petals curling inward, colorless, as if fed by decay. He fell to his knees, the jar still in his hands, and he understood now. The garden had not died. It had been fed by offerings meant for the living, received by the dead. Water given to ashes, prayers recited above graves that had never been marked. He turned toward the temple. The courtyard was veiled in smoke, but behind it the prayer hall doors had opened, and the monks were gathering again, not walking, just appearing, as if called. He rose, clutching the urn, and returned to the courtyard. The abbot stood alone at the center, his hands folded, his head bowed, and in a voice as dry as parchment, he said, "Karma grows even in ash." He offered him the urn. Why were they buried in the garden? The abbot looked up, They weren't. Then what is this? The abbot's eyes darkened. This was a gift that was never accepted, a soul that was never named. It was hidden there because memory can be dangerous. He stepped forward and took the urn. Then, without another word, he turned and walked toward the bell tower. And Tenzin followed, and behind them the ash began to rise again, not falling this time, but drifting upward like smoke, as if the garden was finally breathing out. The village below the mountain had been empty for years, its lanterns no longer lit, its houses sagging under time and moss, its streets walked only by wind and memory. But now, ash fell there too. Tenzin stood at the edge of the eastern ridge, looking down through the thinning trees. Where once the top trees parted to reveal green fields and tiled rooftops, now there was only gray. The village was blanketed in it. The same soft, whispering ash that fell over the temple. Except here, it moved differently. It coiled, like smoke drawn into lungs. The abbot had said nothing when Tenzin asked about the village. He had only handed him a small satchel of incense and told him, "Go down, see what remembers." So Tenzin descended the old stone path, the one that pilgrims once used during festivals. No one had walked it in years. Moss covered every step. Vines crossed where once prayer flags had danced. And still, the ash followed. It floated behind him, ahead of him, around him, like a procession. When he reached the village gate, he stopped. The Torii arch still stood, though cracked and leaning. A single rope of braided straw hung from it, frayed and gray. The village beyond was still, but not silent. He heard something, faint, repeating. He stepped inside. The air shifted. The ash fell slower here, as though it remembered this place, as though it was drawn to it. The houses still bore ancestral markings above the doors, though many had faded or been defaced. Some had symbols scrawled in red. Some had strings of bells that swayed without wind. And in the center of the square, the old altar. Cracked, unlit, but not abandoned. Offerings sat upon it, fresh. Rice, fruit, even paper dolls folded with care. Tenzin frowned. No one lived here. No one had come down from the temple, and yet someone was maintaining the shrine. He stepped closer. The ground beneath the altar was soft, not with soil, but with ash layered so thick it seemed to breathe. He reached out and touched the rice bowl. It was warm. The fruit next to it was rotting from the inside, though its skin was unbroken. He turned. On the side of the square, the schoolhouse still stood, its windows boarded, its door hanging open. He stepped through. Dust exploded around his feet. Desks were overturned. Chalk still rested in the tray below the blackboard, where someone had written a phrase over and over. We must remember their names. The writing was shaky, childlike. He turned slowly toward the back of the room and froze. There, seated at one of the desks, was a child. Small, still, dressed in temple garb. Its head was bowed, but there was no face, just ash. Not flesh turned to ash, but ash given shape, as if grief had sculpted it. It did not move, but he heard it whisper, not in sound, in memory. He saw flashes, children being taken to the temple during the drought, offered for blessing, never returned. He gasped and stepped back. The child dissolved, collapsed into a pile of soot that held the shape of a small robe. He fled the schoolhouse, back into the village square. The chanting had returned, from nowhere, from everywhere. The houses, the shrines, the wind, and he realized it was the same chant, but slower, lower, like lullabies sung to bones. He moved through the village, past the well, past the abandoned inn, past the temple outpost once used for rituals, and at every turn the ash deepened. It no longer floated, it followed. Shapes formed in it, shadows with outlines, outlines with hands. They did not approach, but they watched. He could feel their presence in the breath between words. He reached the last house, the headman's residence. Its door was closed, but behind it, chanting and the sound of footsteps. He raised his hand to knock, but the door opened on its own. Inside, ancestral tablets covered every wall, hundreds, thousands, but none bore names. Only that symbol, the same that had followed him since the scroll, the same one scratched on the urn, etched into the ash, burned into the Bodhi tree. It pulsed. He stepped inside. The chanting grew louder, and then silence, all at once. He turned and saw them, figures in robes, half-formed from ash, standing at the entrance, blocking the light. Their faces were covered, but their hands, each held a single strip of parchment. They stepped forward. One by one they placed the parchment at his feet and vanished. He bent down. He picked up the nearest slip. It bore a name, his name, but written backward, as if he were being remembered by something that had seen him before he was born. He dropped it, fled from the house, and as he crossed the village gate to return to the temple path, he looked back once more and saw the figures gathered in the square, not threatening, not hostile, just waiting for him to finish what had been started. Some chants are spoken, others are remembered, but the most dangerous ones never end. Tenzin returned to the temple just before dusk. The sun, or what remained of it, hung low behind a veil of ash. Light filtered through in dull amber streaks, like fire seen through closed eyelids. Nothing in the world below shimmered. Everything was matte, muffled, blurred, including time. He had not spoken since leaving the village. The parchment slip bearing his name, backward, still trembled in his satchel. He had tried to let it go. The wind had carried it back. Now, as he stepped into the courtyard, the world felt changed. He could feel it in the stone beneath his feet. The rhythm, a quiet pulse. Hum, hum, hum. The air was not silent. It was chanting, not aloud, not from mouths, but from matter. The prayer wheels spun slowly on their own. The wooden beams of the temple groaned in cadence. Even the birds, what few still circled the bell tower, beat their wings in rhythm, as if the whole temple breathed one endless verse. Tenzin passed through the corridor. His reflection moved out of sync in the bronze mirror. Behind him, faint footfalls echoed, though he walked alone. When he reached the main hall, he stopped. Every monk sat in rows, eyes closed, bodies still, lips parted just slightly, and from each throat the same sound escaped. Not a chant of words, not a language, just tone. A sustained hum, low, unbroken, and identical. Tenzin stepped closer. Their bodies had begun to change. Not grotesque, not monstrous, but unfinished, as if the ash had begun smoothing them out. Their skin lost its lines, their faces lost their sharpness, their robes blended into their flesh, seamless, formless. Only their mouths remained unchanged, still open, still chanting. He walked between them, toward the altar. The scroll was there again, unrolled now, pale gray parchment, covered in script that had once been dead, but now pulsed gently, as though freshly inked with something that still remembered pain. As he approached, the letters rearranged themselves. They formed lines, verses. Some he had spoken already, some were new. All of them familiar. He whispered the first line. The air in the hall shifted. The monks hummed louder. He whispered the second. A crow screamed from the roof and fell, dead before it hit the ground. He hesitated, then spoke the third. The temple bell rang, not from above, but from within the scroll. Its metal voice echoed like a memory buried under 1,000 feet of silence. And then the hum changed. It began to separate. One voice rose slightly, another dropped, a third split into a droning harmony. The chant, no longer unified, became layered, twisted, alive. It no longer sounded sacred, it sounded hungry. Tenzin dropped the scroll. The parchment writhed on its own, curling into itself, then unrolling in a spiral. Symbols spilled across the wooden altar like spilled oil, staining the grain with letters that had no name. Behind him, a sound. A monk had stood, Brother Leem. His face was blank, his eyes empty, but from his mouth the chant came uninterrupted. Then another stood, and another. Soon the entire assembly rose in unison. They turned toward Tenzin, but not to see, to follow. He fled, through the side door, down the corridor, into the inner sanctum where the relics were once kept. He slammed the door shut, but the chant continued, from the walls, from the floor, from the blood in his chest. He dropped to his knees, pressed his hands to his ears, and yet the chant remained, even stronger, because now he was hearing it not with sound, but with memory. He saw flashes, the buried monks, the burned scrolls, the ash garden, the silent child in the village, the Bodhi tree cracked at its heart, and behind it all, the figure he had seen in dreams, but never spoken of, the monk with no face, the first chanter, the one who opened the door. He was coming. No, he was already here. Tenzin looked up. The walls of the sanctum were trembling. The prayer wheels had shattered. The candles burned without flame. And in the center of the room, a new figure had begun to form, built not from flesh, but from chant. Ash swirled upward into a shape, a spine, a skull, hands, Mouth, no eyes, just a throat, open, humming. The chant poured from it like steam from boiling stone. Tenzin pressed his back to the wall. No! The figure stepped forward, each footfall soundless, yet thunder in his chest. It extended its hand, not in anger, not in malice, but in invitation. Tenzin looked down at his own hand. It was gray, his veins fading, his fingertips softening into powder. The chant was not just sound, it was transformation, a ritual that had no end because it was the end, and the beginning. He crawled toward the altar. The scroll pulsed with light, not golden, not white, but the dull, pale shimmer of memory. He reached for it and spoke the next line.
There was once a time when the prayer wheel never stopped turning. Monks passed it each morning, giving it a gentle spin with the brush of a sleeve or the grace of a bowed head. Each rotation carried 1,000 prayers skyward. Each turn pulled sorrow into light. Now it turned on its own. Tenzin emerged from the inner sanctum as if from a grave. His limbs ached, his breath tasted of dust and rust. The scroll no longer pulsed in his hands. It had gone silent again, as if satisfied. But the chant had not stopped. The temple hummed with it, from walls, from rafters, from beneath the stones. And down the corridor, at the end of the southern wing, the prayer wheel turned. It was not large, just a simple, ancient cylinder, carved from rosewood, inlaid with bronze, mounted on a stone base. It had once been vibrant with reds and golds, etched with sacred mantras along every inch. But now it was gray, coated in ash, its mantras obscured, its light gone. Yet still it spun, slowly, smoothly, endlessly. Tenzin approached it with bare feet and silent steps. No one else stood in the corridor. No wind stirred, no monk passed, and yet the wheel moved, perfectly timed, as if kept by an unseen hand. He watched it for several minutes. Each turn seemed to echo, not in sound, but in feeling, like ripples in still water. Each revolution felt like breath in lungs that no longer needed air. He reached out, stopped it. The silence that followed was immediate and deafening. He closed his eyes, and the chant, which had filled every corner of the temple, went quiet. Just for a breath, just long enough for something else to rise beneath it. A whisper, not of words, but of memories. He saw the wheel again, a vision this time, spinning in the rain, but not ash, rain, water. He saw the monks, younger, laughing. He saw the garden blooming. He saw villagers lighting lanterns along the path. He saw the Bodhi tree alive with birdsong. Then, flames, screams, starvation. The chant was not born from worship. It was born from loss. He opened his eyes, and the prayer wheel spun again, faster now. Flecks of ash burst from its carvings with each rotation, floating into the air, then freezing mid-air. They hovered like tiny gray orbs, unmoving. Each one pulsed faintly. He reached out to one, touched it, and the world around him went still. His mind flooded. He was standing in the temple, but it was long ago. He wore the robes of a senior monk. His hands were not his hands.
They were older, worn, and he was arguing with another monk, the one with no face, the first chanter. They stood over a scroll, not the one from today, but its twin. The chanting had begun, and the senior monk, the body Tenzin now wore, had refused it, had buried the scroll, had sealed the ash chamber, had buried the chanters upright, to stop the chant from finishing, because they knew the chant was a summoning, not for gods, not for rain, but for memory, memory so heavy it could take form and walk. He gasped, fell backward. The vision broke. The ash orbs shattered like glass. He was in the corridor again. The wheel spun so fast now it blurred. The floor cracked beneath it. From its base the engraved stone began to glow, not with light, but with shadow that moved. Symbols slithered along its edge like snakes. Tenzin turned to flee, but standing behind him was the abbot, still, silent, watching. "Why did you send me to the village?" Tenzin whispered. The abbot replied, "So it would remember you." "You knew this would happen?" "I prayed it would not, but prayers do not stop what has already been spoken." Tenzin stepped toward him. "The chant, what is it finishing?" The abbot looked toward the wheel. "It is finishing us." Tenzin's throat tightened. "We can stop it." The abbot shook his head. "It must end, or it will echo forever. Ash falling for all eternity. Memory turning like a wheel no hand can hold." The prayer wheel groaned, a low, deep sound like an old tree splitting in a storm. A crack ran through its center. A sliver of dark light spilled out. From inside the wheel, something moved. Tenzin stepped closer. It wasn't solid. It wasn't smoke. It was formless memory, a presence that pulsed in rhythm, a shadow built of forgotten names. The chant rose again, from inside the prayer wheel, from the hallways, from the trees, from the ash-covered sky. The abbot looked at Tenzin. "Finish it," he said, "or it will echo every night, forever." Tenzin pressed his hands together, and from his lips the next line of the chant came, unwilling, unbidden, unstoppable. The wheel split in half. Ash exploded outward, and beneath it a staircase was revealed, spiraling down into the earth. He looked at the abbot. The old man only nodded. "Now," he whispered, "we descend." There are few things more sacred than flame. It is the mouth of ritual, the breath of prayer, the only thing the dead still answer to. But some fires refuse to burn. The staircase beneath the broken prayer wheel led downward in a spiral of stone and soot. Tenzin held a lantern. Its flame flickered with each step, not from wind, for the air was still, but from something nearer. The abbot walked ahead of him, his robe trailing ash that did not settle, but hovered in his wake like smoke from a forgotten incense stick. They did not speak. The descent was long, longer than the mountain should allow. It led not into a chamber, but into a forgotten shrine carved into the rock itself, older than the temple above, older than the stone. The air was thick, still, heavy. It clung to the skin like damp cloth. At the center of the shrine stood a stone pyre, wide, flat,
rimmed with blackened prayer stones, and upon it a body, wrapped in ceremonial robes, arms folded, face covered with a white veil. The monk who had last chanted, the one who died with his mouth still moving. His name had been Brother Shen. Tenzin stepped forward. "Why is he here?" The abbot spoke softly. "He died in mid-chant. The others would not bury him. They said the fire rejected him." Tenzin blinked. "Rejected?" The abbot nodded. "They lit the pyre, but no matter how hot the flame, his body remained untouched. It would not catch." Tenzin moved closer to the pyre. The edges were charred, the stone cracked from heat, but the shrouded form was whole, untouched, waiting. "Then why bring me?" The abbot looked at him. "Because you began the chant, and only the one who begins can end it." Tenzin said nothing. The lantern in his hand dimmed slightly. The walls of the shrine bore carvings, not the elegant strokes of mantras, but crude lines, circles within circles, mouths without eyes, spines drawn like rivers, and the same symbol, always repeated, always pulsing from the stone like breath. Ep, the mark of the first chanter. The abbot placed a hand on the pyre. "You must recite the line he never finished. Only then will the fire accept him." Tenzin's mouth went dry. "If I do, will the chant end?" The abbot's face was calm. "No, but it will know you are listening." He looked down at the still form. "And it will listen back." Tenzin stepped forward. He placed the lantern on the ground. His hands trembled. He closed his eyes. And from within, deeper than breath, deeper than blood, the line came. It was not in a human tongue, but it moved like language, bent like sorrow, echoed like memory. He spoke it, once. The moment he did, the stone beneath the body began to glow, soft orange, then white, then black, as if it reversed the act of fire. The shroud curled away, not from heat, but from age. It disintegrated into threads, into strands, into powder, and revealed the face beneath. Tenzin gasped. It was his face, but older, worn, ashen, mouth slightly open, and from that mouth a sound continued. The chant. It had never stopped, not even in death. He stepped back. "No!" The abbot stood still. "You must finish it." Tenzin shook his head, but his lips were already moving. He recited the line again. The figure on the pyre exhaled ash, and for one terrifying moment opened its eyes. Not human, not divine, just void. A void filled with symbols that spun like galaxies of grief. He spoke the next line, and the fire answered. The stone pyre burst into flame, not red, not yellow, but white, so bright it left no shadow, so hot it made no sound. The chant stopped. Tenzin fell to his knees. The body burned, finally. As it turned to ash, a wind rose from nowhere, not from the temple, not from the cave, but from within. It swept through the shrine. The flames vanished. The ashes were gone. and in their place, a single scroll, untouched, resting where the heart once beat. Tenzin reached for it. The abbot said nothing. He unrolled the scroll, blank, but the symbols began to appear, one by one, and he recognized them. The same as before, the same from the village, the wheel, the urn, the garden. And as he watched, a new one formed, Ep, but this time, beneath it, a name, his own. The abbot bowed his head. It has marked you. Tenzin whispered, "What does it mean?" The old man looked up, eyes hollow with something older than fear. "It means the chant now belongs to you."
Not all monks are remembered. Some are erased. Not through violence, not through fire, but through forgiving. And those who are forgotten do not sleep. They wait. That night, the temple slept as it always did now, not in stillness, but in chant. The hum of verses filled the walls. The rafters whispered. The earth below pulsed. Tenzin lay in his chamber, eyes open, hands folded across his chest. The scroll from the shrine rested beside him, still blank, yet still writing itself. He no longer questioned it. His dreams were no longer dreams. They were visions. Tonight, he did not sleep. He was pulled, gently, as if a thread from his spine had been tugged by unseen hands, down the hall, past the bell tower, through the stone corridor behind the old kitchens, to the wall that had no door. He stood before it, felt it breathe. Then it opened. No sound, no resistance, just space and darkness. He stepped inside. A narrow stair descended, carved from stone long before the temple existed, worn not by footsteps, but by ritual. At the bottom, a chamber. No candles, no incense, no statues. Just ash. And in the center, a figure. Seated, cross-legged, robed, still. At first glance, he was like any monk in meditation, except he had no face, no mouth, no nose, no eyes. Just smooth, pale skin, like porcelain soaked in sorrow. Tenzin could not breathe. The air pressed in. He stepped forward. The figure did not move, but from the walls, chanting, not loud, but layered. It was the same chant, only older, slower, carved into the stone, written in breaths. Every surface of the chamber bore the markings, verses without end, spirals, hands, symbols drawn in circles that led toward the seated monk. Tenzin whispered, "Are you the first?" The figure did not answer, but something changed. The ash on the floor lifted, not stirred, lifted, and began to shape. Faces formed in the dust, dozens, flickering in and out of form. Eyes wide, mouths open, each one trying to speak, but silenced by absence. They were not spirits. They were memories of monks who had forgotten who they were, and in their forgetting they had been claimed. Tenzin took another step. The faceless monk raised his hand. Not sudden, not threatening, just present. The ash fell still. The room held its breath. Then, from the walls, one symbol began to glow. It pulsed gently, not light, but weight, the pressure of knowing. Tenzin fell to his knees. I didn't mean to summon this. I only wanted rain. The faceless monk tilted his head, and from the walls a voice came, not from lips, from stone, low, ancient. We gave rain. Tenzin trembled, but it was ash. The voice replied, because what you called was remembrance, and remembrance does not fall soft, it falls heavy. Tenzin looked up. Who are you? The answer came like wind through bone. I am the silence left behind worship ends. The monk stood, not walked, rose. The chanting grew louder, not from the room, from within Tenzin's chest. It echoed up his spine, behind his eyes, between his ribs. He clutched his chest, fell forward, and the monk stepped toward him. His presence was not heat, not cold, but absence. Where he moved, the air forgot itself. And as he reached Tenzin, he extended one hand, not to harm, but to return. In his palm, the scroll, the real one, not the echo. Tenzin took it. His hands burned where they touched it, not in fire, in truth. He looked down. The scroll unrolled, blank. Then slowly a single line appeared. When the mouth forgets, the earth remembers. He looked up. The monk was gone. The chamber empty. Only the ash remained, scattered in a perfect circle. At its center, his name. Not carved, not written, but known. It did not happen suddenly. No storm, no wind, no voice crying from the heavens. Just one breath, and then the sun was no longer golden. Tenzin awoke before dawn. He knew the hour not by sky, but by the absence of it. The temple bell had not rung, but the chant continued. Now it lived in everything. In the rice bowls left untouched, in the robes folded too neatly, in the wood grain of the altar. Even in the silence between breaths, there it was. The scroll in his chamber had grown heavier. He could feel it even before he opened his eyes. When he did, he saw what the night had done. Ash drifted like fog, not just across the floor, but through the very air, hovering, coiling, breathing. He stepped into the corridor, and the temple no longer looked like itself. The prayer wheels were still, but not from rest. They had turned inward. Carved symbols faced the wall. The statues of the bodhisattvas wore new expressions, not carved by hand, but shaped by ash that clung to their faces like grief made visible. One wept, one smiled, one bled from eyes that had never opened before. Tenzin passed them all. He felt no fear now, only reverence and responsibility. He entered the courtyard and looked to the sky. It was not dark. It was not clouded. It was gray. The kind of gray found in bone, in ash, in old paper where names had been erased. The sun was still present. He felt its heat, but no light came. Just a pale glow, like memory through a veil. He stepped into the center of the courtyard. The monks were already there. They stood in perfect circles.
their robes no longer distinct, each face covered with a thin layer of ash that shifted like breath across skin. And in the center, the abbot. He held the final scroll. Tenzin walked to him. The old man's hands trembled. His eyes were dim. "It's time," the abbot said. Tenzin nodded. He looked around the temple. Every door was open. Every bell rope uncoiled. Every path led inward. Not to the mountain, not to the altar, but to the chant itself. He turned to the monks. "I will finish it." Their heads bowed in unison. The abbot stepped aside. Tenzin took the scroll. It unraveled without wind. He began to read. Each line cut deeper. Each verse felt like remembering something that never happened but always existed. His voice shook at first, then steadied. The chant rose with him. The monks spoke with him, not in echo, but in continuation. Each voice filled the gaps between his words. Together they shaped the final cadence. The ash in the courtyard lifted. It rose into the air, slowly, and did not fall. It circled the bell tower. It spiraled into the trees. It spread across the sky. And above the temple, the sun flickered, not with heat, with memory. Tenzin reached the final line. It was not written. It was waiting. His lips parted, and in a voice no longer just his own, he spoke, "Let forgetting be finished." The ash collapsed. Not fell, collapsed, as if exhaling. The monks dropped to their knees. The prayer wheels spun once. The bells chimed together once. And then the chant ended. The silence that followed was not absence. It was sacred. The kind of silence that seals a ritual, that wraps memory in gold, that allows the world to breathe again. Tenzin stood in the center of it all. The scroll dissolved in his hands. The sun, still gray, held steady above. The abbot approached. He bowed. Tenzin bowed in return. "It is done," the abbot whispered. But Tenzin looked upward into the pale sky and spoke quietly. "No." He turned back toward the temple. "There is one more voice." The abbot frowned. "Whose?" Tenzin did not answer. He walked through the courtyard toward the ash chamber, toward the place where it all began. The monks did not follow. The chant had ended, but Tenzin had one more verse to speak, one more voice to return, one name left to remember. Some echoes do not fade. They rest, beneath stone, beneath silence, beneath ash, until someone breathes them back into the world. Tenzin descended the steps alone. The ash chamber waited beneath the temple, where names had once been hidden, where chants had once risen from below, and where the first whisper had answered. He carried no lantern. He needed none. The walls glowed faintly now, not with light, but with memory. Each stone carried the words of those who came before. Each step remembered the weight of ritual. At the bottom, The chamber was unchanged, and yet somehow different. The urns still lined the walls. The circle at the center remained. The cracked floor where the chant had first awakened still pulsed. But now there was quiet, a deep, sacred quiet, not emptiness, completion. Tenzin stepped into the circle. He knelt, closed his eyes, and waited. The air shifted. From the cracks beneath him, a sound emerged, soft, metallic. Bells. Not the great bronze bell in the tower above, but smaller ones, the ones buried long ago beneath the original foundation. The first bells, carved not for sound, but for memory. They chimed gently, muffled by centuries of soil and ash, yet he heard them. One chime, then another, then many, ringing in slow waves like ripples on a still pond. Each bell was a name, each name a prayer. He opened his eyes and saw them. The monks, not the ones he had known, the ones who came before. Dozens, hundreds, surrounding the chamber. Their robes flowed like smoke, their hands folded, their eyes filled not with fire, but with peace. At their center stood one figure, the faceless monk. But now he had a face, Tenzin's own, worn by time, carved by sorrow, refined by knowing. Tenzin stood. The air around him grew heavy, not with dread, but with returning. He stepped forward, and the monk did the same. They met at the center of the circle. No words passed between them. There were none left to say. Only one thing remained: release. The monk extended his hand. In his palm, a single bell, small, silver, flecked with ash. Tenzin took it. The chamber fell utterly silent. He raised the bell and rang it. Chime. The sound was thin, delicate, but it passed through stone, through silence, through time. Above, in the temple grounds, the monks looked skyward. The ash stopped falling, not because it had ended, but because it had settled. It had found its place. The gray sky lightened, not with color, but with clarity, as though the sun, too, had remembered who it once was. Back below, the faceless monk bowed and faded. One by one, the others followed. Each turned to ash, each drifted upward, and each disappeared like breath into morning. Tenzin stood alone in the ash chamber, the bell still warm in his hand. The chant had ended, but it had not vanished. It had been heard, and now it rested. He walked slowly back up the stairs. The temple greeted him in stillness. The monks were gathered, their eyes open for the first time in days. The abbot stood beneath the bell tower. He smiled. Tenzin walked to him, held out the bell. The abbot accepted it with reverence. "It is finished," he whispered. Tenzin nodded. "No,
it is remembered. Behind them the wind stirred, not ash, not soot, but wind, real wind. It brushed the prayer flags. They fluttered for the first time in seasons. High above, the great bronze bell swayed gently. And then, gong! It rang, not from shadow, not from ritual, but from peace. Its echo rolled down the mountain, across the forest, over the village, and in one forgotten house a small chime rang in response. Far below the roots of the temple, beneath the soil, the old bells fell silent once more, covered in ash, but never again forgotten.